Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about films that goes beyond basic movie criticism to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari, and with me today is...
Garret.
And what movie are we overanalyzing this week?
Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret.
Based on the Judy Blume classic, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, about a 11-year-old girl named Margaret, played by Abby Ryder-Fortson, who is uprooted from her life in New York City for the suburbs of New Jersey, going through the messy and tumultuous throes of puberty with new friends in a new school. She relies on her mother, Barbara, played by Rachel McAdams, who's also struggling to adjust to life outside the big city, and her adoring grandmother, Sylvia, played by Kathy Bates, who isn't happy they moved away and likes to remind them every chance she gets. What did you think of the movie?
This was an iconic book when I was growing up. I mean, it was a very Midwestern, wholesome type book, even though it takes place in, the East Coast. It's a very...
I'm shocked! Shocked! Okay.
And so, this book was a staple growing up, and...
So boys read this book, or you read this book?
I think it was required reading when I was in 7th grade.
Fascinating.
But, yeah, I thought it was really cute and well done. I have some concerns, as we'll get to, but, as a movie just to go and see, and as a family movie, and a movie I think that, young girls should see, I think it was cute.
And boys?
And boys, yeah. I mean, but, girls, for the reasons we'll talk about in a minute, why I think young girls should definitely see this. But, yes, girls and boys.
Yeah, that's interesting, because, this movie is so very specific to my life in the sense of parents of different religions, raised without none, suburbs of New York City, all of that. It's I am Margaret to a certain extent, so I'm curious to hear about how it was relatable for you. But yeah, I mean, this movie was so delightful, and it was just so lovely, and
It was really a feel-good movie, but not for a lovey-dovey feel-good. It was so wholesome. It
was wholesome, but it was wholesome, but without ever veering into saccharine or corny. I think it can be hard to kind of show the angst of tweens. It can be trying sometimes as an adult when you watch things about teenagers and you're I know that this is what it was like when I was a teenager, but I'm really annoyed by all these people and I want them to stop whining. And Margaret's struggles are just so great. And funny in your most sort of kind-hearted, we were all there kind of way. I laughed a lot. Everybody in my theater laughed a lot. So people seem to really enjoy it.
Yeah, I left the theater and I texted 3 people and I was like, you really should go see this movie. You're going to absolutely love it. And just for the reasons you were saying, it was very you could put yourself in their shoes. You could be there, feeling the struggles, even though it was in the 1970s. And you just you were mad in some parts, you were frustrated, you were angry, and other parts you were oh my gosh, and rolling your eyes, but really well done as a movie. I thought the acting was actually pretty nicely done by everybody, and it felt raw emotion, which was something that's hard to portray sometimes.
I thought the kids were all excellent. I couldn't believe, number one, how good the child actors were, but I think for me, I've never been a big Rachel McAdams fan. Outside of Regina George, I feel she gets stuck as a love interest sort of foil for a guy kind of role, where she's just sort of cute and there. She was magnificent. She made this movie I couldn't believe, I was she was so good. And it's funny because she's sort of at that stage in her career where she got a mom role, right? Which is the death of the Hollywood actress when she reaches a certain age. But this was just not a mom role. She just brought so much to it. And I thought the chemistry between her And Abby, the child actress, like, so believable as mother and daughter. I was like absolutely weeping along with her when she gets her period for the first time, and then the mom's like, I don't know why I'm crying. It was so good. I was like, okay, Team Rachel McAdams, like, yeah.
I thought her acting was phenomenal. My downfall is I wanted a little bit more of her story that the book gives us. And there just wasn't time in this movie. I mean, it was still a long movie. But there wasn't... I wanted the mom's story a little more fleshed out. Like, you know, how she kind of overcommitted herself and how she was asked to do so much and kind of give up her life and her desires and her wants. And how she kind of finds herself throughout the book a little bit more. You know, we get to hear more of her story in the book. But the way, the facial expressions Rachel McAdams made during this movie, I was like there, sitting with her, feeling the exact same thing. And she mirrored the script so well in a way that, like, you felt so palpable. And just sitting there, like, and when she even had the littlest movements when she'd raise her eyebrow or tilt her head or shrug her shoulders a little, you'd be like, oh, I get it. I get what's going on right here. Like, I feel all of this. And I thought she was superb. I thought probably one of the best. Her and the girl who played Margaret, I thought were the two best actors in the whole movie.
Yeah,
actresses.
Yeah, I mean, I just couldn't. It's not like I ever thought that she was a bad actress, but I just haven't seen her do something like that where you're just with her every step of the way. And such believable emotion. I loved it. Which then brings me to the one true sour note of this movie.
Kathy Bates.
Yes. She was so miscast.
It didn't fit for me at all. Like, Kathy Bates is a Jewish grandmother who, like, is, like, over-dramatic, and she's too dry for that. I felt like it just didn't land for me. I agree. I think it's the one role I was just kind of like, every time I was like, you know, and everybody else was so raw emotion and so powerful. And I know Kathy Bates can do that. That's the issue. But in this movie, she did not.
It was just, right, there are Jews, there are Jewish people, and then there are New York Jews. And, like, a lot of what most of the rest of the world thinks of as Jewish is New York Jews, right? Seinfeld Jews, right? That the cadence, the intermixing of Yiddish, which she said one Yiddish word and it just didn't come off, like, and it's like you have to have a fluency with it where it sounds like you said it a million times. Like, it can't be like, oh, she said l'chaim, like, and that didn't come off either.
So such an awkward.
It didn't feel real, like it, and I'm like, you have this sort of, again, like, she needed to have walked out of the best I can put it to people who are not familiar with this role is, like, she needed to have walked out of the set of Seinfeld into this movie and to be really Jewish, because they give her a lot of really Jewish mother lines. Like, you know, she's like, oh, well, you know, they say you die after you get people move away. Well, I've had a good run. It's like, you know, her Jewish mother guilt that she's always laying on Barbara and by proxy Margaret, you know, and she just was so wrong for that part. And it was really disappointing. And you have the very stereotypically looking Jewish man, and then you have a Jewish woman part that goes to a woman who is not remotely Jewish.
Yeah, it was the one thing that I, like, saw that first I was like, oh, she's going to play the Christian mother. Like, literally, I thought she was the Christian grandmother to start with, and I was like, I don't remember. Oh no, like, she's the Jewish grandmother.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yeah, I agree. There's not a lot more I can say than just, like, the good news is she's not on screen the entire movie.
Right.
And the pieces she was there, her character is important, the plot is important, but her portrayal of a Jewish grandmother just didn't land for me.
Yeah. A bubby, as we would say. Like, it just didn't happen. And it was disappointing to me that, again, we're sort of erasing this type of representation off of screen for a role that was leaning so heavily into it. And And I mean, everything else about the movie was so great. Like, I wouldn't say it ruined it for me, but like it did have a sour note.
I'm glad the last 20 minutes we didn't see her, because you kind of forget about her when she's not on screen.
Yeah.
Which was nice.
I did think that they did another good job with the nostalgic 70s sets and costumes without overplaying their hand too much.
Yeah, it wasn't, I mean, you literally would have, like, walked into the 70s and felt right at home there. But they weren't, like, trying to beat you over the head with every 70s icon that had ever existed. They weren't trying to beat you with a brand from the 70s on every countertop. They were just like, this is our home. It's kind of, you know, my favorite is when they're furniture shopping. And she's taking around showing her these very eclectic, like, 70s furniture. And she's like, what do you feel about these egg-shaped chairs? And I was like, oh, that was the 70s.
Yeah.
And but I agree.
It's a Luke, as we'd say.
It didn't beat you over the head. Like, this could have taken place, you know, in the 90s. You would never have known, like, you know, the cultural pieces were there. It felt the right time. It wasn't overly exhaustive of the 70s. Yeah,
it didn't hit that nostalgia button hard, which I thought was really good. But to that end, like, I didn't know which way they were going to go with the movie. I was halfway expecting a modern interpretation of it. I was like, it's curious that they kept it in the 70s. Not sure. I don't know. Do you have a feeling about that one way or another?
I just think it would have been harder for this to be portrayed in a time of technology, because the girls could have texted each other more often, and they would the lack of technology and the lack of connection to other people and to be able to find information about developing bodies, puberty, sex.
Having to steal your dad's Playboy.
Yeah, looking for genitalia, and you know, they steal an anatomy book to look at male anatomy. That stuff would have been lost in the age of technology.
Yeah.
And is often lost for better, and I don't want to say for better, for worse. For better reasons, like, you know, it is nice that kids have access to information now when they're going looking for it. But with so much information, oftentimes wrong information is presented now, instead of, like, in the 70s, you had a book of male anatomy. It's going to be correct because that's all you got. And looking for a Playboy, like, that unrealistic idea, like, these are the only boobs I know that I can see are women in Playboy. That's not realistic. So the internet...
They're so round!
They're so round. Mine just look like wizard's hats. Yeah, so I thought it was a really nice choice to keep it in its original context. Because I think it brought the more wholesome feature. I think that's part of it. The more wholesome feature was because it was legitimate. Kids will kind of be like, why didn't they just Google it, I'm sure. But parents and people watching this above an age of 25 are going to be like, oh yeah, this makes more sense. Like, this is what things were like.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I did think, like, one of the things that was sort of missing in it, not missing, but, like, was very particular to this story, which was not relatable to me, was the lack of a big sister. I thought so much of what they go through, like, and have to deal with is because nobody had a big sister. And, like, there's so much of a role that pre-internet, like, your big sister would tell you about. And I was like, this is funny because what they really need is just, like, a big sister who's already got her period a couple of years ago and can tell you what it's like from the other side. So I did love that. I also... As, you know, I have a very personal bias. I think kids are lacking in independence these days, and it's a problem for the kids. So I also love the 70s. They put her on a bus to New York City by herself at 11 years old.
And asked the conductor to look after her.
Yeah, and they trust that she's able to do it in an age when there are no cell phones, so if something happens... Right? So I kind of love the 70s parenting that was on display and the freedom that the kids have. I also talk about relatable. When I moved houses when I was 6 years old, and I think either the day the movers came or the next day, a little girl just like showed up on my doorstep and she was like, "Hi, my name is Bonnie. The realtor told me a girl my age was moving in to this house." Like, she just walked over to our house and we became friends and that was it. And I was like, that's like, oh my God, that's like exactly what happens. And I was like, God, no one would have even let a 6-year-old cross the street now.
Well, and the realtor would have never told the entire community who was moving in. Like,
yeah.
Like, we've become a private culture. But also one that's like, yeah, and no kid would have walked into somebody else's house and be like, "Hi, I'm looking through all your stuff right now," like they would in the 70s. It was a different time, but I thought, and as much as I disliked her, I think this is why I like the acting, the girl who played Nancy Wheeler.
She was great.
I disliked her so much, but I think that was the sign of a good actress.
Yes.
Because she like nailed the part that I didn't like because I didn't like her because she nailed it so well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, like, the things that I hope, I actually, like, went on Rotten Tomatoes to look at some of the reviews to see, like, who had brought their kids. I was like, do kids like this? Like, I get why adults like it, but I do remember being, number one, absolutely obsessed with who had gotten their period and who hadn't. Like, that being just an utter fixation. And like rampant speculation, and then definitely looking down on the girls who got it really late. When the mom's like 14 and she's like, "Oh, it's no big deal." I was like, "Oh, I don't believe for a second it wasn't a big deal. Like, come on, the world does not change that much." Like, I was like, no, we were all like, what kind of freak doesn't get their period until they're 14? Like, I remember how much of a preoccupation that was, and I couldn't tell you why. Like, other than, like, it was the biggest thing that ever happened in our lives for the most part.
Yeah, it's like, oftentimes I think, culturally we stigmatize periods and, like, oh, PMS, it's that time of the month, and, like, women are emotional and everything like that. And I think what was more probably wholesome about, like, the 70s and 80s is, like, this is a sign that you're growing up. This is a sign of womanhood. And, like, really the 1990s and in the 2000s, it was, like, a really stigmatizing thing to have your period. And I think we've started to come really back around to, like, the joyous occasion, and we have a lot of, like, now period celebrations and, period parties and, like, just things to be like, hey, this is a beautiful thing about your body that's, like, you're entering adulthood. And it's something I think that's very special that, like, this movie really portrayed well. Like, these girls were like, oh my God, you have to tell me when you get yours. Like,
yeah.
Like, this, like, communal sharing of, like, I want to know when you're having, like, the best day of your life. And it was really, I identify as male and don't have a period, but, like, it was just really wholesome to kind of see, like, that bonding in young teenage girls that, like, I don't feel like we see often anymore.
Yeah, and I thought, yes, number one, absolute obsession with it. Number two, when her and Jane go to buy the pads and they're on the, like, creaky conveyor belt with the, like, sort of teenage male employee at the drugstore, and I'm like, that also, like, I remember simultaneously being obsessed by it and sort of absolutely humiliated by the idea of it. And there is, like, a developmental step of, one, getting your period, and then two, confidently walking into a CVS and just buying tampons, like, open in the cart or the basket where anyone can see that you're buying them. It's just, like, another developmental step that, like, we all had to go through. And it was like, okay, at a certain age, like, everyone assumed, like, the shame and the secrecy around it was definitely a thing.
And I thought it was really, it was a wonderful line in the movie where Margaret finally gets her period, and she's like, Mom, and Rachel McAdams, our mother, is like, oh my God, let me get you a pad, let me show you how to use it. She's like, I've been practicing for 2 months in my bedroom. And, like, the mom was not even, like, she's just like, well, I guess you don't need me anymore. Like, it was, like, this really cute, like, bonding moment. And I was like, it was so well done. So, I know I'm going to say wholesome 8 million times, but until you see this movie, you're not going to know quite what we're talking about, because, like, there's something about it just sitting there and watching it that you felt connected to everybody in that movie without feeling overpowered and
manipulated.
Yeah.
It didn't feel manipulative.
It felt like you wanted to be there to support everybody.
Absolutely.
And you even felt bad for the characters you didn't like, when Nancy Wheeler gets her period for the first time after lying about it and telling everybody she'd gotten it, you're feeling for her. You can tell she's scared. You can tell, like, it's a very emotional time for her, that she doesn't know what's happening. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for her. But I was like, oh my God, you lied. I can also, like, be mad at you.
Actually, like, that was an interesting scene because I took it the wrong way, which is another sort of developmental stuff that unfortunately, for the most part, we've all gone through. And I think actually there's like a male equivalent of this. So this is a very relatable to everyone of a certain age, which is accidentally getting your period and getting a visible blood stain on your clothes, which is what I thought had happened. I thought that it was like on her dress and she was like freaking out because there's no way to cover it up. And I'm like, I guess sort of equivalent to like getting an erection and having everyone see it. Like,
right.
It's happened to almost all of us at some point or another. It's really embarrassing and you just kind of have to...
You work through it, right?
Yeah,
like,
you
put your algebra book on your erection and you just like put your hands on top of it and you just pretend like nobody looks at it. It's one of those things that like mortify us as teenagers, and as adults we're like, no, it literally happens to everybody. No one cares. Yeah,
I think that's another thing. That's a good point because there's another thing that the movie did really well, which again, like the stakes are not high, but for Margaret they are. Right? So again, they give you that sort of tween sense of like how big a deal all this stuff is, and none of it is that big a deal, but it feels like it is. And it takes you back to the time where it feels like it is without, again, you like getting very annoyed at her for like, oh my God, like it's just a period. Calm down. Like,
right. But like at that time, like that's their whole world. And developmentally, like that's where we want them to be. We want them to be thinking about themselves. We want them to be thinking about what's going on with you and your body and developing, you know? And that's, I think, what was so great about it, because we could all put ourselves in those shoes like, oh, I was there one time. But it's so nice to be able to see, too, that you can also be like, okay, it happens. Everybody gets a period. You know, we're all adults here. Like, you get a period that's going to be happening probably for the rest of your life up until a certain age. Like, it's a fact of it now. And I thought that was what was really, the movie brought to light really well, is like, yeah, it's okay that this is her whole existence currently. Because what else does she have to worry about? A book report, a research project, making friends, deciding who's right, who's wrong, and liking someone. And I thought that was like done so well in the movie in such a tasteful, awkward teenage way. Like, oh, I like someone, but I can't tell who I like because it's not the popular person. And
that popular kid did a great job, too. Whoever that actor was. Nailed it.
He did. He was like...
He was amazing.
And I really loved, the parents were super supportive. That was a little, when the dad and mom were like, well, we haven't paid our blonde boy for the week. Go take him the $5. And she's like, okay, if I have to.
Yeah.
Like, it was just this super sweet, like... her, from the very first moment she meets him, she notices there's this beautiful visual scene that you just can't capture in writing, where she like glances at him and he lifts his arm up and there's a little bit of underarm hair. And like to her, that was like the most exciting, exhilarating thing, because it showed that he was going through puberty. And I was just like thinking about that. I was like, in the book you're going to like read about that, but it's not going to be as intense. There was this great visual. But it was just so wonderful to watch her relationship with him in such a kind of teenage, like, we're not going to talk, but I'm going to kind of be obsessed with you. Then we'll talk like once or twice, and then it's going to be awkward. But really, really well done from script to portrayal on screen. And I think that we've missed that in a lot of movies in the past.
Yeah, and I actually, it was a brief moment, but I loved that, it's the dad and the mom who sort of winkingly are like, oh, why don't you give him the money? And there's just, obviously this like tacit approval that she likes a boy and that's okay with them. And there isn't like, oh, she's only 11 and like this like patriarchal, we have to protect her virginity. Like she's too young to date. Like it was such a small moment. And I thought, this is so nice to see. Like I am so tired of seeing the parents who like freak out about their daughter's sexuality. Right. Like, and it's like, it was really nice to see the mom and the dad just kind of give their approval to something that is just an age-appropriate thing. Like,
I thought it was probably one of the best scenes in the whole movie because the mom and dad were kind of like giddy about it too.
Yeah,
like,
they were, Again, absolutely nailed by the performers. Just comes through. So yeah, I did like that it was set in the 70s because I agree with you. Like, some things just wouldn't have translated and they would have had to write a lot of things really differently. But I thought, does this just take it so far out of any kid's experience that they just don't see themselves in it? I don't know.
That was my one worry is like, I thought this was going to be a nostalgia piece going into it, but it was more nostalgia because I think adults are going to love this movie more than kids will actually understand it. Because it is not a lived experience of children. They're not going to be like, why didn't they just text? Or why didn't they just Google it? Or what are they doing? Like, you know, it was very unrelatable, I thought, to kids in a technological age. But maybe it's because this book was all we had when we were growing up. You know what I mean? Like, this was a lot of young women's, and Judy Blume's books were a lot of young women's experiences, right? Like, this is all what they had to kind of, like, draw information from.
I mean, I don't think you can, underestimate the impact of Judy Blume in general. Yeah. And I looked everywhere to see if I could find the clip, but I can't. But one of Margaret Cho's, like, early routines when she was first becoming famous, she does this whole thing about being a child of the 80s and the like lip smackers lip balm, and like she does this whole thing like and quotes quite a couple of references, and she goes, and we all know it, and she gets the entire audience of the auditorium to all do like, I must increase my bust. And it's such a memory from the 90s, right, of like Margaret Cho being one of us. And, like, what an interesting, surprising turn her career took as a sidebar to that. But I think, and and Judy Blume, like, it was banned. And I think that it's really interesting to have this movie come out and have, hopefully, a resurgence of the popularity of the book where there is such a movement against acknowledging.
I don't know why we're so afraid of periods. It baffles me why we are right now so afraid of periods. I mean, we had this conversation when Turning Red came out. Remember the animated movie? And there was this outrage because a mom bought her daughter tampons because she was getting her period. Like, what is this outcry against, like, natural human processes? I don't understand. I wish I did. Actually, I probably don't wish I understood them, but I just don't get why this is such a big deal. You know, this is a banned book because it talks about periods.
And with all the climate we are in, like, one of the things that I was thinking about when I was watching this movie and remembering back to, again, being absolutely obsessed with who got their period, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and let me preface this by saying I have no lived experience on this, and I am not an expert and have no expertise in this. This is just an ill-informed opinion, but we were talking about puberty blockers for trans kids, and I was like, you have to give kids puberty blockers. Like, you have to. I was like, you don't understand what it's... I was like, maybe he does, but I was just like, you don't understand what it's like to go through puberty as a woman. Like, that is such... There's so much to that experience that if you are not going to live as a woman, like, you can't go through that. Like, it marks you in a certain way. And that's not to deny that there are trans women who transition later, but I'm like, if you can avoid that lived experience, like, that just... you just can't have that. You have to skip it if you can. Like, it just seems so incontrovertible to me that getting your period and all of that and developing and being sexualized and having to deal with the male gaze, like, all of it, which is so confusing and so world-changing through, like, 11 through 13. I'm like, you can't put a kid through that if they're not going to be a woman in the end. Like,
I hear what you're saying, and...
I mean, you can. If that's how it happens, you can. But if you could avoid it...
That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I think we have what I hear you saying is we now have more opportunities in technology and access to people trying to live their more authentic selves earlier, if possible. And now we have more tools to be able to keep them from experiencing.
Delay deciding, if that's what you need. If you need a pause, then I say yes, you should get a pause.
But also, like, I'm saying now kids have earlier access to deciding themselves, which I don't know that was always the case. Because now we have, again, more information, more technology, more opportunities, we have more access to therapy, we have more access to medicine, we have more access to medical care. And so what I hear you saying is, like, puberty, whether you're going through it as a male, a woman, puberty, whether you're going through it as male, female, or trans-identifying individual, either way, is hard on everybody. And that can mark is an interesting word, that can impact you as an emotional, traumatizing part, emotionally, physically, spirit as being your internal inside, not necessarily, as we'll talk about in a minute, some religion, but like it can impact you. Puberty can be very hard for multiple reasons, for a lot of things. And if we can keep kids from having to experience a puberty that then maybe they don't identify with later, that would be helpful. And I agree with you on that point. I think that's what I'm just saying. I'm just trying to...
Yeah, I'm saying also, like, it's hard. It's so hard for everybody, but
And I think the trauma you're talking about associated with going through something that doesn't feel like your authentic self can really carry over. And this is, in an informed opinion, that trauma, especially with trans-identifying individuals in their youth and their developing bodies, carries over very hard into a lot of their adulthood because they struggle with double the amount of puberty pressure that everyone else does, because they're wanting typically to experience either a different puberty or feeling like they're not attached to their own puberty, not liking parts of themselves physically, mentally, sexually.
Which is already part and parcel of puberty.
Right. Like this I think it gets, and
then, like, magnified plus whatever,
yes,
you know? Like,
exponentially harder for trans-identifying individuals. That being said, I want to make sure if anybody's listening to this, they understand that your body is your choice, and you get to decide who you are.
Yeah, you can transition at any time.
Yeah, no, that's not... Yes, that. Very much that. Sorry. Yes, very much that. But if you are struggling, if you are listening to this podcast and you have dealt with trauma in your past due to puberty, or you don't want to go through puberty or something like that, understand you're not alone. Going through puberty, whether you be male, female, trans-identifying individual, because puberty is very hard.
I mean, it was the worst. I did not want to go through puberty.
Puberty is one of the most traumatizing times of a teenager's life, and there's tons of research to back this up, unfortunately, because it's an emotional state where your brain literally develops and your body develops at the same time, and so you're having to literally come up with complex thoughts in development while your body changes, and that's really hard. You start moving from concrete thinking to abstract thinking. And that's really hard, because when you're dealing with a lot of emotions about what you don't like about yourself, it comes into play to, like, what am I doing? What is this? Is this appropriate? Is this right? And that's hard. We didn't really
talk about religion.
Stop forcing religion on kids, and stop trying to assign them what you believe in. Let kids figure out if that's what they want to believe in. And I actually thought, one of the things I thought this book did back in the 70s was kind of be like, stop pushing kids towards religion. And not just like, you need to be religious, but like, stop pushing kids towards something that they've never had the chance to experience anything else with. The most powerful scene in the movie to me is when, Jewish grandparent and Christian grandparents are in the same house trying to be like, well, this is what our granddaughter should believe in. And not a single person stops to look at the child and be like, what feels good to you? What feels right? And this scene in the movie is so well done, because you see this conversation happen so many times in multi-religious households. And it just, to me, was like, the mom was like, oh, it's my fault I set this conversation up. And the dad was like, you didn't do anything. We've tried to raise our daughter to be like, you have a choice. And she does. She gets to experience 3 or 4 different types of religion in this movie. And she's like, maybe I don't even believe in God. And that, I think, was so powerful to be like, this is the 1970s. And someone was like, maybe I'm atheist or agnostic or any type of unreligion also. And that was so wonderful to be like, seeing this moment in this movie, you were like, yes. A child is being like, none of you asked me. None of you cared to want to know what I think. And she's like, maybe I don't believe in God. And then she does this over-voice narration, which just almost broke my heart. She's like, God, I'm not sure if I believe in you right now. But if you're up there, I could use some help.
Yeah, it was that whole scene. So again, I am Margaret, although somewhat of the reverse, where my mom is Jewish and my dad is Catholic. And we used to go and stay with my aunt. And when my sister was 13 and I was like 11, my sister was complaining to my dad that every time we went and stayed with my aunt, like she would make us go to mass on Sunday. And my dad was like, what? She can't make you go to mass. Like, you are not baptized. You are not Christian. Like, you are my kids and your mom and I raised you to have no religion. Like, this is totally inappropriate. And apparently the next time my sister was staying with my aunt, she then repeated that speech to my aunt, and my aunt just looked at her and went, you're going to mass. And that was the end of the discussion. But, like, it was funny in our heads that, like, it's funny to me that my sister brought it up because we just sort of took it for granted. Like, I took it for granted. And it didn't occur to me that we're doing anything, like, behind our parents' back. But, I mean, my dad just... that, and then when my sister was living with her boyfriend, it was like a big thing. And my aunt, that same aunt, was like getting on my dad's case. And my dad was like, you know, me and my wife lived together before we were married, and you had a problem with that then, and we didn't care, and I'm her father, and I don't mind. It's fine. She's an adult. Like, they can live together, and I don't want to hear you say anything more about it. And I was like, go, Dad. Like... So there were times in my family when they had to, like, be like, no, like, we are not Catholic like you. We are raising our kids a specific way. So I thought, like, that scene was so impactful to me, and I thought it was really interesting. And I also kind of related to Margaret because we were the only non-religious kids of our friends. Every other friend we had was religious.
Yeah, and I grew up in the man who gave birth to me and, you know, my mother are both very religious. He's a preacher. She's a preacher's wife. Like, I grew up in religion from the time I was a kid until I was expected, even in college, to drive 2.5 hours to go to church. In college, as a freshman, on Sundays, I would drive for 2.5 hours. And
was that version of church not available to you?
Not
closer to where you went to school?
Yes and no. So, like, you know, where you belonged is where you were supposed to go. So belonging means joining that congregation. And so... Yeah,
unpack that for me, because that seemed means
sure,
nothing to me.
So, like, when you join a congregation, basically, in the religion I was brought up in, Missionary Baptist, for those who are listening, and you were supposed to go and support the congregation you belonged to. You could join different congregations if God led you to do so. But because that was the one that I had ended on, the congregation I joined, I was kind of expected to go and drive 2.5 hours to Kansas City from Springfield, Missouri on Sundays as a freshman in college. And then I started to really rebuke religion. Thank you, liberal arts school. Actually really helped.
Don't give fodder to the conservatives.
But... No, liberal arts taught me critical thinking. That's the difference. Not to
don't give
forget not to forget religion. But yeah, so before I kind of like rejected religion as a concept of man-made structures, I was really expected to. And so I was raised in a religion where there was no other option for another religion. And then when I took a world religion class, I was like, what do you mean there are like 17 gods in the world that like people currently believe in? Like, what is this? Like, what do you mean people don't believe in God? Like, I thought, I had never experienced a non-God believer. I experienced other religions. I never experienced a non-God believer. And that was a wake-up call. And, you know, now today we've had this conversation. I don't believe in man-made religion at all. I think it's a structure that supports very complex ideas of community that help people grow. But I don't really believe in religion. I'm not religious. I am spiritual. I believe in some natural energy in the world, whether you call that God or Allah or Zeus or karma or whatever. I'm here to respect whatever you believe in. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this movie was really powerful to see a young teenager be able to make these kind of decisions that most people are denied. And really great parenting to be like, we decided she didn't have to decide. She can make her own decisions. She can go to these others. She can test everything out. She can figure out what feels good for her. And then we'll support her in what she decides. That was so important.
That was important, but I love that there was a little bit of BS behind that. Because I definitely sensed that from my parents too. Where they kind of really didn't want me to be religious or believe in God in the end. At least my mom definitely didn't want us to believe in God. And so you can see as she's doing the exploring that they're like they're open-minded, but they are very much like, she can pick when she's older. And they were like, she's older, she can pick. And they're like, not yet though. Like,
but that was more about parental like overprotection. Like they were trying to still protect her. And as a parent, as a parental, I'm not a parent. I can see as a parental figure how they would still want to protect her.
Well, yeah, because they had such negative experiences and they were afraid of it for her, right? So they were bringing their own sort of baggage to it, which my parents did as well for various reasons. So it's funny to me watching this movie. There were they added quote unquote diversity to this movie in a way that, in one sense, I thought like probably people would feel was very modern, but in my sense, I was like, thank God, because Margaret's school looked like my school. And what my school would have looked like in 1970 and more or less looks like today. We've always been a majority minority area in a fairly wealthy suburb of New York City on the New York side, not the New Jersey side. And I was like, this was my experience. Like, I will say we were sort of predominantly Catholic or Jewish. Like, I didn't know a whole lot of Protestants. They were there. But, and I realized later, I was like, I didn't know anybody LDS. I was like, there was like the one Jehovah's Witness kid, because the poor Jehovah's Witness kids stuck out because they wouldn't eat the birthday cupcakes. Which is not to, again, I don't mean that in any derision to Jehovah's Witnesses, other than like they were very singled out. Like in my school, there weren't a critical mass of them. So it was like the one kid who didn't do the Halloween thing. So you knew who they were. So I was like, I loved that Margaret does experience a Black church and does have different experiences, because I was like, that's very true to my lived reality and not that different a time period. People think like diversity was invented in the 90s and it wasn't.
Yeah. I enjoyed this like religious exploration because, I mean, the book and the movie are like, are you there, God? It's me, Margaret.
Yeah.
Like talking to God throughout the whole movie is part of the narrative.
But the questioning of it is there in itself. Are you there?
Right.
Right? It's not,
but the request,
dear God, right? Like, it's, are you there, God?
If you'll notice throughout the movie, she prays in different ways. And I think that's one of the most like things on film that was really well done. Sometimes she's on her knees praying with her hands clasped. Other times she's like looking down. Other times she's looking up. Like it was a very interesting, like every time she prayed, she did it a different way. And praying here is quotations again, because like praying is this narrative we hear in her head most often. But also asking God for, like, God, get my period. Can a boy notice me? Or also things like, God, can you make it all work out so that I have friends? Can you help my mom and dad get through their struggles? Can you help my mom reconnect with her parents? And, like, some things come true and some things don't. But in that, she had to kind of realize that things are not necessarily manifesting the way that she wants. And it's interesting to kind of watch her grapple with how things manifest and how by the end of her arc, her story arc, she realizes that she may have gotten things, like, it's a monkey paw situation. She may have asked for things and gotten them the way she didn't expect them. She asked for friends, and then by the end of the movie actually makes really good friends. But she didn't start with that. She started with people who were not necessarily nice and kind to her, but pretended to be her friend. So overall, I thought the movie did a great adaptation of the book. Makes me want to go back and reread the book in a way that really felt authentic, in a way that felt palpable for people to digest, instead of being over-religious, over-sexualized, and ways that really felt that people are going to talk about this movie in a way that nostalgia, but also kind compassion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I hope for this movie the most because it does appeal to adults in such an important way that it will just be a family watch, that parents will want to watch it and kids will want to watch it, and that will just make it the perfect family movie because it has something for everybody.
And that it will stir some conversations, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope it has a good shelf life to that, and we have to give it a social impact score, the ultimate reductive moment of our podcast, between 1 and 10.
I struggle with this because I've been thinking about this since I saw it. It's above a 5. It's probably below a 9 for me. But it depends on what we talk about, when, and with who. And so somewhere between a 7.5 and an 8 probably, because I think it does have a lot of social impact. I think you talk about this movie for, days on end and still never cover everything in this movie. But I think that was the intention of the book when it came out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with a 7 for the very reason of, like, that book was so transgressive when it came out, to be so focused on puberty and religion at that age. And I'm like, sadly, here we are 50 years later, and this movie really showing, like, girls getting their periods is still not something I can think of that I've ever really seen on film recently. Like,
yeah, I mean, we talked about this. Like, I'm curious to know if the conservatives will have a problem talking about periods in Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, as they did with Turning Red a year ago when it was released.
All right, to that end, recommendations.
What I really thought about after I was leaving this movie is, like, it really just made me think about Beverly Cleary's Dear Mr. Henshaw, and the moral of that story being, we have to learn how to adapt from a very young age, and especially as we grow as teenagers. Things don't always work out the way we think they're going to, and what do we do with that information? And so it really made me just want to recommend Dear Mr. Henshaw, because if you've never read this book, it's about a young person who writes to an author and gets unexpected responses. And it's a learning tale and a parable for, like, things don't always go as planned. So make sure you're living your best life, because you never know what to expect.
Yeah. I am recommending that the portion of the population that does experience periods check out a menstrual disc. This is kind of a newer thing to menstrual cups, which have been around a very long time, but are still kind of a new idea to a lot of older women. Yeah, they're great. Give it a shot. And check out our website, moviestomatmatterpodcast.com. Check out our Facebook page. Leave a non-sexist or misogynistic or racist or homophobic comment on our YouTube page. Or, TERF's not welcome either.
TERF's never welcome.
Yeah, so reach out to us if you have something interesting to say, not if you want to spread hate. And we have a store you can see on our website. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.